One of the biggest pressures today is people saying yes to everything. Mark Fritz, what is the secret to saying no and why is it important?
Well, I think the first thing is to be assertive in what you're doing. You can't be focused. Focus is subtraction, it's not addition. So you got to be assertive in how you deal with people. But, the only way to get across what no means in the right way is to listen and listen first. They say that a lot of people, are aggressive when they say no. It's because they're not listening. They're just looking at everything from their own side. I think you have to say no, taking into account both people. But I think there's no way you're going to be focused unless you have the ability to say no.
Well, our show goes out to accounting professionals all over the world. You bring in perspective. This is why we love having you on, Mark, from different industries, all the many sectors you work in all over. What can busy people like accountants learn from other sectors, or is everyone the same?
I don't know. I think everybody's in the same boat these days in terms of there's just too much to do
Yeah, there's
and
overwhelm, overload, burnout.
yeah, I always say to people, when I grew up, there was only three television channels. There was only so much you could do with your spare time. You go to the bowling alley, you do this with friends and so forth. So I think we're just overwhelmed with choice. And a lot of times we think we should be doing all the good things that we have on our plate and everything. And every time, if you're motivated, you're coming up with new ideas all the time and wanting to do more and more and more. But I think the key is doing less. I was just rereading a book, a very old book, titled, I think, "Do Less to Earn More."
Hmm. It's a
Doing the
simple
right
message,
things.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't come through. So why don't we say no? We must be scared of something.
Well, we're scared of how people will react if we say no to them and we can't do something and so forth. There's the other one. I think it's what's the acronym now? FOMO, fear of missing
Yeah.
out.
Hmm.
That way to fit in. I always say, if you're trying to fit in, and you're trying to be like what you're basically wanting to be average.
Hmm.
And if you're trying to fit in all the time, and I think it's important for us to do things in terms of our own, what's going to help us go faster. But we have to be aware that we're not getting to where we want to go by ourselves, right? So we do have to be building relationships and everything. And there was a saying, I think, from Zig Ziglar. It says you can get everything you want in life by helping others get what they want.
Hmm. Well, there's a wonderful little document you've created, one of the many that we'll put a link to on our website here on our show notes, that says some of the fears are not pleasing others, being perceived as uncooperative, any negative consequences, damage in relationships, missing out on opportunities. That's the FOMO you talked about, being judged as incompetent, not a team player, not meeting expectations. All of these things run through our mind when somebody asks us to do
Yeah.
something that perhaps is beyond scope. And it's tough to get your head around how can I get out of this? We're going to come on to that, but it puts you in a difficult situation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And if you're overstretched, every little request is kind of like just the final thing that tips you over sometimes.
Mm,
I think the real key of saying no is being so strong in your focus that you can respond very, very quickly as to why you're saying no and what yes would mean to something else, or vice versa. And also be aware of people's times. Many people sometimes will ask for something immediately. It doesn't have to necessarily be immediately, but they don't trust you to come later on. So, there's an element of negotiating our time and saying, okay, but if I bring this to you the end of the day or end of tomorrow, would that be okay?
mm,
So, unless we speak up and we position it in the right way, or we ask a few questions as to when it's actually needed, we can't read people's minds. So, we could say yes, or we could say no, but, or whatever, but we need to understand a little bit more behind that request.
And what are the kind of situations when you're coaching, mentoring people that come up where people should be saying no?
Well, I think a lot of times is you know, when you're running a large organization is you come in and it maybe start a new job and everything. There's lots of things happening. If you don't stop certain things that are no longer being productive, whatever, because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings because they're leading this project, you don't want to stop it, etc. I think that's a real big thing. You know, I still remember now the story of Steve Jobs when he came back into Apple and he had like 30 some products. And he said, hey
Mm,
guys, we're going down to four:
mm,
desktop, laptop, consumer, professional. So I think there's an element of if you have to be strong enough and you have to be strong enough in your direction because you're not saying no in isolation just because of your own workload. You're saying no because saying yes to this would be no to something, and we're not moving towards what we want to achieve faster. So, you know, I found in almost anything, you're trying to get collaboration with people or whatever. You can't be arguing just your own point because then it becomes like a competition
yeah.
the time. You have to put something out in front and saying, this is going to take us there faster, or this is what we need to do to achieve the goal or whatever. So you have to have some type of target, which you're now reasoning why you might have to say no in this instant.
I'm reminded of the quote by John Maxwell, Mark, that says, say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. But we
Exactly.
keep saying yes to all the good stuff, fine, but then we don't either have the vision to see the great stuff when it comes along, or we can see it, but we don't have the bandwidth to do anything about it. So on your document, you gave some examples of when we should be saying no: scope creep, unnecessary meetings,
Yeah.
taking on other people's responsibilities. You're nodding here on the video, last minute requests,
Yeah.
volunteering for opportunities, unrealistic deadlines, conflicting priorities, personal boundaries.
Yeah.
I, there's such a big list of things that we should be ready for in advance, shouldn't we? Because the worst time to think of the best thing to say is right when you're in the moment, as the words are coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, and if you're not focused, you're just going to react emotionally to something and not logically behind it and so forth. The other one you mentioned is very important is boundaries, and I think it's
Mm,
even more important today's because everybody's life is much more blurred, right? You're combining work time, personal time, and everything. You have a lot more flexibility because of driven by the home working during the pandemic. But I think we have to state our boundaries and say, you know, listen, this is part of my family time. You know, I can't do that tonight, but I'll come in, I'll do that. I'll start that right the first in the morning and I'll get it to you by noon or something. So I think we have to be a lot more aware of that. And I think if you're a good leader, you're delegating things in ways that will match the boundaries of the people around you. And I
mm.
think you have to take that in because if you're not respecting their boundaries, you know, they're not feeling as valued. And I think that we have to ask a few extra questions sometimes with people around us as to what their boundaries are.
There's a wonderful accounting firm I'm working with in North Carolina, USA, called Bernard Robinson and Company, BRC. They have an amazing culture, Mark, where they do have each other's backs in situations like that, but it comes from the leadership down, where they're not in the office at 8 o'clock and in the evening. And if they are, they came in at noon,
Yeah.
and they will leave and go to the kids' recitals and athletics and have their own life. And when they send an email at 1 o'clock in the morning, they don't expect an answer back. And everyone's got their own personal boundaries and they all work in different ways. And we are all different creatures, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I think you don't create that culture without talking about it. You know,
Mm.
what you talk about comes about. So you can't sort of create a memo and say this is the culture we're going to have, right?
Yeah.
You know, they've talked about it, and I think, you know, like for me, a culture is shared expectations. It's what we want to achieve together, and kind of what behaviors we expect from each other. So I think that type of discussion has to happen sometimes now, and you have a foundation for much better, how would you say, conversations when you have to say no, or you have to say no, but, or you know, or you qualify this is not going to get us there faster. So,
Mm.
I think it's really important what you said is that they talked about it, and it ends up they're respecting each other's boundaries because they're aware of them.
Now, you mentioned the word assertive earlier. You outlined three approaches to saying no that the audience will recognize. There's an assertive one. I'll get you to jump into it a little bit more. There's a very aggressive one, which is, I'm not doing that. Get out. And there's a passive one, which is where you're silent and you're seething on the inside, but compliant on the outside. And you're almost too accepting, but you really criticize yourself on the inside for not being stronger. So just outline those three approaches and the downsides of the last two.
Yeah, I mean the last two. I mean, if you're aggressive, the aggressive person is just saying no. They're not telling you why, and they're
Mm.
being very forceful about it without listening. The passive person is just listening, but not listening to understand anything. They're just sort of resigned to the fact that they're just going to have to do it. And then, as you say, they're going to hate themselves because they said yes all the time, and in that way. But the assertive people are very interesting. Assertive people are actually listening because there's no way to package why you need to say no or in what context and so forth without listening to the other side first. I think the very best assertive people have learned to ask the right questions and listen to the things that they understand because assertive people and very successful assertive people are like context providers. Whatever they say has a very good context. They're just not going back at you, but they're trying to frame why they're saying something, or they're trying to leave a lasting impression with what they're saying. So I think assertive people is much more open in terms of sharing their boundaries and so forth and what they're thinking and so forth. But you only earn the right to talk by listening first. And then people will listen to you if you listen to them first.
Mark, how do you feel about scripts? We know that scripts work because every song we've ever listened to, we get emotional about, but that's been sung 1,000 times and rehearsed 1,000 times. Every movie we watch that scares us or entertains us, that's been written, rehearsed 1,000 times. So scripts work, but if they're delivered in a good way, you see, people like accountants, professionals like that, they're not necessarily spontaneous. They're not great quick witters and comedians. So having something to say in advance for certain scenarios. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's not so much a script, but there is some key phrases or things that would
Right.
be very, very helpful. But it's almost like what should be my reaction when I encounter these type of things. And
Mm.
be more aware that it's not necessarily responding right away, but it's you have to frame why you're saying no in a way that the other person will understand. So, I think, the more you get better at it, the more you do it, and the more you're just seeing what works, you're going to remember those things. But what I found is look at it this way too. When I'm a presenter and I teach and everything, and so if I'm very, very well prepared, my mind is not focused on what I'm going to say, but on the audience and looking at different
Right.
things, right? So if you're very, very understanding your focus, you understand your focus very, very well, and you're set yourself up that you're not going to react, you're going to be calm, you're going to be much more aware in the moment. And I think that's why having a clear focus, and that's why you see people that are assertive are generally calm. they're,
Yes.
they're not going crazy because they have that foundation of being focused, and they're more in the moment listening than just talking or just reacting.
Now we're putting this episode out at the beginning of the year because we all start with good intentions, New Year's resolutions, all of that. But often what we do is we say, all right, I'm going to do more of something. I'm going to take on more. I'm going to go to the gym more. I'm going to do more running. I'm going to do more exercise. I'm going to eat less food, which actually takes more planning. So we're taking on ever more things. Any advice for setting good New Year's resolutions or calibrating your year, your quarter, whatever it is, with some kind of boundaries?
Well, it is. There's two things I always say when you want to do a change or the New Year's
Yeah.
resolutions. I mean, the first thing is that you have to hold yourself accountable in some way. So you just can't set it. But what is doing this well look like? And try to do it at a minimum. What are the minimum habits? A friend of mine did some coaching and fitness. He says, just do 10 minutes, because once you get into it, you might want to continue it on. So what are the small things you're going to do? But even more important, I found, is this. The most successful people have a reflection and think ahead time, right? If you're going to get very active and you got some very key goals and focus, and you're going to keep adding to your plate, you need to have a time each week to reflect and think ahead. What do I need to continue doing? What should I stop? And you got to put your goals in front of you right away and say, okay, I made these commitments when I set these goals. Did I honor those commitments last week?
Mm.
What am I going to do to honor them next week? So I used to call my reflection time, and I generally do it midday on Friday, my triage. I'm trying to
Good.
get rid of things that I shouldn't be focused on and focused on the right things. But it's asking myself the question, was I accountable this week to the things I said I was going to do? And I think without that, you go 3 or 4 weeks without a reflection, and all these things are building in your head, and you're not going to react well in those no situations.
Mm. It's one thing saying no to other people. It's another thing saying no to yourself because we don't want to deny ourselves pleasures. We want the good things in life. So having that conversation inside your head is as important as anything, isn't it?
Yeah, and you need something in front of you, right? Because if everything is in your head, you think in fragments, so you don't have all the fragments together. So you
Mm.
have to have something in front of you on paper or whatever that holds yourself true. If you ask a lot of people, that's kind of like your weekly North Star,
Mm.
right?
Well, you've given some hints already about how busy professionals can deal with this, but we're going to go through your 5 steps that you lay out on your document, and you can give us a little bit of context for these. The first, you say, in saying no, be confident and direct and stay in the driver's seat. Just unpack that a little for us.
Yeah, I mean, you're only confident if you're focused, but don't always assume that you should take a back seat and just appease people and things like that. You
And being
know,
direct means not pussyfooting around or getting to the point quickly.
Getting to the point quickly, right? If you're going to frame a context why you have to say no, you don't go through, oh, this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. This is just one thing. They don't want to know that. You
Mm.
have to focus it and frame it. But if you frame the context in a concise way, you allow them to respond, and then you can respond back in that way. So what I found is one of the most important things in very good leaders and very good communicators is they're concise to allow other people to talk more.
Mm. I remember the quote by Mark Twain. He said, "I'm writing you a long letter because I don't have time to write you a short one." It's
Exactly.
it's that kind of idea. The second tip you give is share with both of you in mind. And you say you've got to convey that you understand each other. What does that mean?
You have to understand why they're asking, what's important to them, what the timing is important, etc., as well. So if you haven't asked a few key questions to listen, you don't know if you can negotiate a different timing of this, or what no means to them. You know what no means to you, but you don't know what no means to them. So I think you have to play both sides in order to package the right context by what you want to say.
Mm.
What does no mean?
Your third tip is listening beyond the words. You've talked already about the importance of listening, but you've also added consider the emotions in what is being said. It's not just the words, is it?
Yeah. I mean, you might have a person who's just really, really stuck and needs something by a certain time. And you, if you see that and you're hearing the things behind it, and you kind of understand their situation, and you know where the request on them is coming from, maybe, in those situations you might accommodate in a certain way, right? Because you're helping them in a time of real need. And a lot of times people don't articulate that in words. They articulate that in the way they describe things and what's on their face.
Mm.
And your knowledge as well of what, how would you say, the background behind their request.
Yeah. You say in step 4, offer alternatives, compromises, and this is You say maintaining or gaining leverage. What does that mean?
Well, as I said, if you're listening to what they need and when, you might be able to negotiate providing something in a different way or so forth, or a different timing.
So you're not
And
saying yo, no, you're saying a different kind of yes,
you're
really.
saying a different kind of yes, but you're merely just saying no, where if you didn't know the background or what they needed and what timing and so forth, you would have said no. But now you can maybe accommodate that. If you're helping them in their time of need, they'll help you in their time of need. It's like
Mm.
interdependence, right? If we need each other in certain ways, we're going to help each other.
You finish by saying stay within your boundaries and play with a home game mentality. That's a wonderful phrase.
Yeah, I mean, you can, a lot of times our human nature is we want to accommodate. And so we kind of push ourselves out of our boundaries to accommodate the other person, especially if we like them and we've done work with them before and everything. We might go out of our way to help them and really go outside our boundaries. In some ways, sometimes people would say, okay, I'll help you out. And then they fail to make a family commitment, right? They don't see their child at the sports or things like this. So I think we have to stay within those boundaries. And I think the more we describe those boundaries, if we're on day-to-day interaction with different people, the more they describe theirs, and we kind of respect each other's boundaries.
Mm. And ultimately, Mark, it comes down to there is a cost to saying no. There is a cost to saying yes. We're all adults. We've got
Yeah,
to make tough decisions. And accountants, particularly, they're looked at as the trusted advisor, super smart people, technically brilliant. And they've got to be on top of things like this. Otherwise, we're going to get more burnout, more quiet quitting, more overwhelm, more mental health problems. It's only going one way.
exactly. Exactly. And here's another thing, too, is that we all have to really understand our best times and our best times to do certain work. So, when I say no sometimes, because I just don't have the right time, but I might say yes, but I can't get this to you to like Wednesday or so forth. And then I know a time when I can fit it in when I'm at my best. In
Yeah.
other words, if I have something really detailed, I'll do it very early in the morning, wake up very early and get it done because I know later in the day my mind would be on that. So I think you can say yes more and you can negotiate better ways that match your own schedule if you know when you're at your best for certain types of work.
That's a really good point. We're going to finish with our best tips for saying no. I'm going to give mine, Mark, and then we're going to finish with you giving yours. I remember a story about a guy that ran a stadium, a football stadium, and he was super good, head of operations, I think. And the CEO came to him with a particular job because he knew that this guy would get the job done. He was amazing. And when he went into his office and asked him to do this job, which was beyond scope, the operations guy pointed to a whiteboard and he said, "These are all the things that you've asked me to do this week. Which of these would you like me to give up to now do the task you're asking me to do? Because at least two of these have got to go." And the CEO looked at the board and said, "You're right. You carry on with those, and I'll go and ask somebody else." So that would be my top tip: is to say to people, "Hey, I'm doing
Yeah.
this, this, and this, which we all agree are really important. If you would like me to give one of these up, I will do. Which one to get the job doing that you're asking me to do?" So that
Yeah.
would be my top tip, a little illustration to show people what's on your plate. What would you leave our listeners and watchers with, Mark, with your best tip?
Well, you kind of stole my top one
Did I?
because it's the context. It's the
Right.
context by which you're doing that. You that in that situation, you framed it visually there and said, yes means that,
Mm,
no means that, and etc. But I think there's another one, especially if you're leading an accounting group and everything, and you're thinking about always the best service to your customers. Here's an
yes.
interesting one. You always have to make sure that your clients are answered faster by your people than you, right?
Right.
Because you always have to, you can't say no to clients, right? So they come to you. But the key thing I found is you don't have to say no to clients if you train them to be dealt with your people. than you. So I found that when I was leading in other departments or clients or customers or vendors, when they ask me questions, if I give them a slower answer than my people could, they'll go to my people more often.
Makes
So you
great sense, Mark.
so you can set yourself up for not having to say no with that particular way.
And that is a good point. Clients feel they have a right to ask you for everything. I mean, they're paying you for goodness sake. So you should be doing whatever they ask you to do. We've certainly got to draw some boundaries there.
Yeah, exactly. And I always work and I advise people, make sure that you elevate the confidence of your people in your clients and never provide an answer quicker to the clients from you. Always default to your people. And if they trust your people, they'll go directly there. They get right to the source and you have an easier time and your mindset is more on the future than the day to day.
World class, Mark Fritz. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to have the chat with you.